Welcome to Sleepover with Yuri. If you've ever been categorized as a minority, whether for being an immigrant or LGBTQ or a person of color, well, guess what? You are in a majority on my show. As Sleepover with Yuri is a show that celebrates diversity, promotes equality, raises awareness, and empowers all minorities. Many Americans refrain from talking about sexual orientation and gender identity or expression because it feels taboo or because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. So, what is the right thing to say? LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, queer. What is queer? Tonight, I would like to raise awareness on gender identity and the letter queer in LGBTQ with my dear friend who identifies themselves as gender nonconforming, non-binary. My friend Vidal, everyone.
Hi Yuri.
Hey Vidal, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming over and having a sleepover with me tonight.
Of course.
I was waiting for it. I cannot wait to just find out more about the whole non-binary, gender non-confirming, queer Q letter in LGBTQ. Before we say anything, I just have to bring up your dress, your outfit. I love what you're wearing. Tell me more about it.
Well, this is actually a hand-me-down. It's an old dress, but it fits me perfectly and makes me feel like a ballerina.
Oh, it's so cute. And the shoes?
Oh, well, those I just got on Amazon, so nothing fancy.
So, Vidal, when I met you, not so long ago, actually, when I met you, right away, you stood out because you were wearing women's clothes. Mm-hmm. And besides the fact that it's very stylish and very beautiful and, really speaking to people, how did that come about?
Well, as you can tell, I'm a pretty tiny person, so actually I really struggle to shop in the men's side of the store in general. But other than that, women's fashion is just so much more interesting, so much more variety, so much more colorful and fun. So at first it started just looking for something that fits me, and then it just kind of turned into experimenting with fashion.
And how old were you when you started trying on women's clothing?
I was always trying on my mom's heels around the house in secret growing up. But it wasn't really until I was like early 20s that I was going to the store and like buying women's clothing for myself.
Does it make you feel different when you wear women's clothing versus, and do you ever even wear now men's clothing at all?
Not really. I still have some leftover men's clothes, but I've really been trying to transition entirely my wardrobe to women's clothes, just because I like the fit, I like the way it looks, I like the way it makes me feel.
And how exactly does it make you feel?
It just makes me feel more natural, more like myself, and I like to feel pretty, but even with more toned down pieces, just something about the fit just makes me feel more comfortable in my body.
Right. When I identify as a gay man, but and I done so many interviews with LGBTQ community, transgender, bisexual. When I met you, even as a gay man who is very open and very active in the LGBT community, even for me, it caught my attention. It wasn't like, oh, not a big deal. A guy wearing, women's clothing. Even for me, it raised some questions. It raised a lot of curiosity, and it stood out, which I definitely would like to raise awareness of and change. I want to normalize things that are normal, that are natural, that feel natural for people like you. Then they should be natural for a community. That's my belief. Would you? And I remember I asked you, like, what is this? Is this just a night out? And you told me that you identify as non-binary and not gender non-conforming. Would you explain more to me? I mean, though it sounds clear, but I would like to just dig deeper on that. How does that feel, or how does it work in terms of identification, gender non-conforming?
Well, I originally identified as cisgender male gay for a long time, for most of my life. It wasn't until I was like 25, I think, that I came out as non-binary, and that was after having publicly presented as femme in women's clothing for a while. But even when I was wearing dresses in public, to start with, I still identified as cisgender male. And it was just a process of figuring out what these labels mean and how it relates to my own identity. And I think everyone approaches it differently. I think it's a very personal experience to understand your gender identity. And for me, it was just like, at first, I felt that presenting femininely does not negate my masculinity. So that's why I kept the male label at first. But then the further that I was diving into femininity, I just realized that the box of man, male, masculine just doesn't apply to me anymore. So I decided to leave that label. Although I keep my masculine pronouns. I still go by he. I also go by she. I also go by they. Pronouns aren't really too big of a deal for me, but they are to other people. So I always try to be very respectful. And I think sometimes, just to make it easier, queer is a good label because it's just so vague that it can mean so many things. And like I said, it's very personal for everyone.
Yes, definitely. I really admire you for your openness and courage to do what you're doing, be true self. I've experienced in LGBT community, a lot of LGBTQ people are struggling with self-identity, self-awareness, and still trying to figure out their sexuality and gender. And a lot of that is because of the society we live in, the community we live in, which has so much stigma and taboo around masculinity and femininity. And here you are, just going with following your heart and being true to yourself and just expressing yourself to the best knowledge that you have. What encouraged you? What pushed you? What gave you strength to even do that? Because I'm sure there are a lot more non-binary people than we see, but they probably do not show it or express it as openly as you do.
So I was living in Florida at the time, and I had an annual pass to Disney World, and I would go all the time, and I loved to have themed outfits inspired by different characters to go to the parks to make my trip a little bit more special. And for a while, it's like kind of like cosplaying, but not really, just like toned down. And for a while, I was basing my outfits off of male characters, and I wanted to do female characters. But, if you want to be Belle, for example, Princess Belle, it doesn't quite have the same effect to wear, like, a yellow T-shirt and yellow pants, as opposed to just, like, one yellow dress, which really immediately is recognizable as Princess Belle. So my first foray into wearing a dress was basing my outfit off of Princess Elena, the Latina princess at Disney World. And it was a hurdle for me to overcome, to go out in public in a dress, and especially I went with my mom and some friends. But Disney World was such a safe space. I knew that nothing was going to happen to me. At worst, I might get some nasty looks or some nasty comments, but I knew that within the resort that nobody was going to hurt me. Nobody could do anything to me because it's a safe space.
I mean, it's a really beautiful story. It's a shout out to Disney, Disneyland, Disney World, for making it possible for LGBT community to be come out. What are the things that changed in your life for the best when you actually accepted yourself who you are and started dressing up a certain way and acting a certain way and just being who you are?
Well, I experienced a lot of joy dressing up at Disney World at first. I feel really grateful that that was like my entry into my trans identity, because it was just a big magical celebration, and everywhere I went, I had like little children coming up to me and complimenting my dress, and it was very wholesome. And I still, I do enjoy the compliments, but on the other side of that, sometimes I wish that I could just be myself without attracting so much attention. And so it's a balance. And some of the comments people might intend them as compliments, but they're actually kind of rude and they don't realize it.
Can you give me an example, please, so people understand and know that?
A very common one is, you look better in that dress than I do. And I get that from a lot of women. And I suppose that they're just trying to say that I look good in a dress. But the implication is that you're trans, so you're supposed to look uglier than me, a natural woman who is just supposed to naturally look good in a dress. So it might be intended as a compliment, but it's kind of putting trans people down.
Interesting. I hear that. I like that. I like the idea behind it that you don't want to stand out, and I'm sorry that I brought up this word so many times when I said it when I met you, because that's how I felt. And in terms of that, for me, I remember I did an episode on racism and Black Lives Matter, and I remember saying that in Russia, where I come from, we don't have black people, so if you see a black person on the street, everyone will be looking at you and trying to take a picture with you, just because we don't see them and it's different. So here, I don't really see guys, who identify as non-binary. I'm sure there are many that I see, but they don't express themselves. And so for me, when I see it, it catches my eye because it's not, unfortunately or fortunately, just not normalized. And it's not normalized. Speaking of Disneyland World, I don't know any Disney movie. I don't know movies where they show family movies that we watch as families growing up, where, there would be like a non-binary friend. And if you don't see it on TV, on the streets, among your friends in school, I never had a classmate or a college mate like that. Of course, when I see it, someone who does that, of course, it's not something that I see on a daily basis, and it comes out for you, unfortunately, as entertainment. And that's a good point, that the way it's kind of like a vicious circle. So for the way to end it is for all the binary and non-binary people to come out and be who they are and not be afraid. And then when it becomes the norm, and when you guys are be yourself and dressed up on a daily basis, then it's not going to be, nobody's going to pay attention. It's going to be like, just a non-binary, like a white girl, black guy, non-binary person, transgender person. It's going to be just a norm that is part of our population.
Yeah, and I think that more people are coming out now, and we are seeing an uptick in representation. We still don't have a Disney princess or anything, but I think that the media is putting some more effort into queer representation, and I've seen some exciting news stories for upcoming projects featuring queer, non-binary characters, and I think that feeds back into it. Like the more representation we see, the more that the people watching it feel comfortable to come out, and then we just it's about empowering people.
Yes. And that's the reason why I'm also doing this and having a sleepover, because I would love to. But for me, you are a power, figure, and I definitely, like I said before, and I will repeat myself many, many times. I admire you for who you are, for doing what you're doing. Vidal, is there like a meetup group or a website, your social media, where non-binary people can, if someone is in the closet and would like to try and dress up and be open, is how do they find you or other non-binary people? Is there like a support group for you guys, or?
Well, you can follow me personally on Instagram. Vidal killed the radio star is my handle, and I'm not part of any groups in particular, but I have done a few things with the Fluid Project here in New York.
And what's the Fluid Project?
Fluid with a PH, and they are a really awesome organization that's just trying to de-gender fashion. And on their website and everything, they have a lot of resources. They host a lot of events and everything, especially with Pride Month coming up. There's a lot going on. Honestly, I need to be better about reaching out and finding groups and organizations. I'm a bit shy, honestly. But the Fluid Project has been like my family here in New York.
So how is your family? How did they react to your coming out, and how are they taking it?
Well, when I identified as male and I came out as gay in high school, that did not go over very well. It was always very taboo in my family, and my parents are Latin immigrants, and they're very traditional. In their countries where they come from, you'll get killed, and they're very Christian, my dad was in the army, so we're on very, very strict army bases, and I grew up during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, so that was just kind of the policy in the house. I think my parents always knew that I was kind of different, but don't ask, don't tell, and they would kind of scare me out of it by telling me these horror stories of things that that have happened to my family, and they just always very strongly discouraged any kind of feminine expression in me, which kind of, it built up into this until I exploded into a Disney princess. When I came out as gay, it didn't go over well. My parents immediately took me to a church like 3 towns away where they only spoke Spanish because they did not want any word of it getting out onto the army base that I was gay, because they were concerned that it would affect my father's job in the army, which I understand that, like, there was a lot of pressure for me to be a good kid, because it does affect, word does get around on army bases, but that was such an overreaction that kind of scarred me a little bit. And from there, we just didn't really talk about it after like the big fight on that subject. And it wasn't really relevant until I had a boyfriend, and then we were fighting again. And it's always been this push and pull of being afraid to bring it up. And then once it does come up, then it's this big argument. I think my parents have both accepted me being gay, but then there was that new battle of getting them to accept my gender identity. And my mother has been pretty accepting about it. I don't think she fully understands gender identity, but she's shown her love and support. And with my father, it's a bit more of a struggle. He doesn't believe in any kind of non-binary identities at all. He doesn't believe in transgender. To him, there are only two sexes, two genders, and I've tried to educate him on it, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So.
Yeah, sorry to hear about that. And again, such an inspiring story. Again, it's very sad, and it's so common when our families, people who raise us and who we look up to, and reject our identity because that's a rejection. And it's sort of like a verbal or any type of abuse when they do not allow children or to be what they are, or tell them bad stories, basically criticizing and judging their children. And good point about education. It's again, I feel like the problems that we have with not accepting other minorities, whether they're people of color or immigrants or LGBTQ, because we need to start normalizing it, especially being that we have this problem. It's obvious we have a problem accepting minorities in this country. It's something we need to start talking about from the very early stage of life.
Mm-hmm.
Disney movies, kindergartens, elementary school, explaining to other kids and people that it's not just men and women, etc. And religion can be also very toxic. You mentioned that your parents were very religious.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a story. Like I said, for me, again, it's an inspiration to sit here with you and talk to you about this. Do you face any, in our community, do you face any legal inconveniences, like looking for a job or going to see a doctor? Do you face any criticism, judgment in a social side of our community?
Well, I think that for me, it's it's not too hard to just put on a shirt and tie when necessary, and I still go by my masculine pronouns. So I kind of have some privilege on that side, because there are some other trans people who, especially people who have like medically transitioned or are trying to medically transition, where they don't have that freedom, and they can come into those issues. I can't say for sure if my gender identity has been a factor in any jobs that I've applied to. It's not like they have reached out and told me that, like, no, we're not going to hire you because of this. But, it's possible. But I think that for me, it's more of a personal mental battle, because I grew up with my parents telling me that I couldn't be gay because then I wouldn't be able to get a job, which is like totally dumb by today's standards. But that was the world that they grew up in, and so they just wanted the best for me. So now I have these fears of not being accepted in the professional world because of my gender identity, or because of my expression, and because of my Instagram page, where I'm very, very public about my expression, and that it's gotten. I've done some stuff that's gotten shared quite a few times around the internet. So. I'm proud of it, but there is also part of me that, like, the ingrained part from my parents' teachings that's like kind of scared of that.
Well, if parents are watching and you have kids who are gender nonconforming, please just show them love and support, because by not accepting them or protecting them from the real world, you're only hurting them even more. I'm sure that people mean and say things from a place of love, trying to protect their kids and show them the best world. But the best way to protect anyone is to show them love and support no matter what. Vidal, I want to ask you to look in that camera, and if you were talking to yourself before you came out, or to people who are still in the closet, non-binary, gender unconfirming, what would you say to yourself back then when you're afraid to come out, or the people who are afraid to come out now? What is the message that you have that would help those?
I would say to my younger self that you are stronger than you think you are. You are absolutely beautiful, and that you deserve true happiness, whatever that means to you, not by anyone else's standards. And you can start small. You are allowed to take small steps towards your happiness, and you should start today.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy that you came to have a sleepover with me. And it's I learned so much for myself, and I feel like I'm going to be a more tolerant, more loving, more caring, whatever, more better person as for our society. And I really hope that people will hear your message and people will understand better. And I hope that other people like you will be able to find love for themselves and strength in themselves, which we all have, and choose the right path and be true to themselves. And on this note, we gonna go to bed and try to get some sleep. I have a lot to digest, but thank you so much, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.